For the final part of this HeroQuest review, I'm going to put each of the figures side by side from the old box with the new box. Now I've got my original set painted, so it's not going to be a perfect comparison. But already you can see down here the card sizes. This is the original Barbarian card, this is the new Barbarian card. This is the original spell card, this is the new spell card. Now they did do new art, which is great. You'll notice these cards are slightly different sizes than that card, and this is obviously much different. But what they have done is every single card in the new set is the same size. So if you want to sleeve these, it's a little easier to sleeve. You just need one set of sleeves rather than multiple sizes. On top of that, this is really cardstock, and that's impossible to sleeve. So you can see over the years it's taken a little bit of damage. So let's take a look at the miniatures. The other thing I've done here, got them all laid out side by side, so I'm going to zoom in so we can take a closer look at each pair of miniatures as we go. So we'll start here since they're in the middle of the frame with the gargoyles. So you can see again the original figure here on the right, and that'll always be the case. New figure on the left, original figure on the right. You can see he's a little goofier looking. I mean, he's much more cartoony, obviously, but he's got a whip and he's got a really cool looking sword. Where this guy's got a battle axe and a sword. Now the swords are very similar. Take a look at them. They did a good job of replicating that. This gargoyle doesn't have any armor on. He has some cool armor on, and just a little bit of a difference. But again, you can see this is much more cartoony and over-exaggerated compared to this, which presents a much more realistic looking type gargoyle, if there would be such a thing. Let's move those guys aside. Let's take a look at the goblins. Put them right there side by side. You can see I've taken the best analog I could. It's a goblin with a little sword. Honestly, they've done a pretty good job approximating it. You've got nice broad pointy ears on both of them. You've got kind of a long hooked nose, but again, this is definitely got a much more cartoonish look to it than the new one does. Orc, there's a new orc with an axe compared to the old orc with a cleaver. Again, look at just the sheer size difference of this guy. He's almost twice as tall as this guy. His upraised arm with the weapon barely goes as high as that guy's head. So massive difference between those. Again, much more detailed sculpt here. The sculpt is fantastic. I mean, down to the detail of the character, it's amazing what they've done here with that. So much more detailed figures in the new set. Now here's a big change. The old set had what's called a Fimmer in it, and Fimmer is apparently a Games Workshop kind of thing, and they didn't want to give it up. So instead they have the Abomination. So again, this thing is huge compared to the Fimmer in the original set. It looks more like a fishman, kind of overgrown fishman, almost something out of Cthulhu mythos, like it's a kowtow or something along those lines. So gigantic creature there compared to the Fimmer. Skeletons, these are probably the most similar in terms of the sculpt. Just looking at them, they're each carrying a scythe. It just depends on which way they've got it oriented. A little bit skinnier here. He's got a little bit of armor on. You can see a shoulder pauldron there, kind of a loincloth type thing. But overall, those are pretty highly comparable. Again, a little more cartoony and exaggerated than here. I think part of that is back when this was brought out, they knew they'd be appealing to a slightly younger audience. As a matter of fact, looking at the box, the original one says 10 and up, and the new one says 14 and up. So they're playing to a slightly older audience here, and they know it. So, okay, so the zombie's carrying a shield and a sword, where this one has a gigantic meat cleaver. Much more realistic, cartoony, but something to me, I really like the evocativeness of that gigantic meat cleaver the guy's walking around with a little better than this one. Just me, perhaps. The mummy, again, you can't do much with a mummy, but you can see extra detail in the sculpt on the left compared to the sculpt on the right. This has got much more exaggerated wrappings to it, but this is a skinnier looking figure overall rather than bulky. It, again, invokes a little more of a desiccated type creature that would have been buried in the desert for a very long time. We've got what used to be the Chaos Warrior is now called the Dread Warrior. And again, just the statuesque difference between these two. This guy stands a full head taller than this guy. There's just no two ways about it. This is a much more imposing, very cool looking figure. I looked at the shield earlier. I showed everybody the shield. That's just a wonderful, wonderful addition to the figure. Look at that kind of leering, dragony, demonic face, whatever it is. It's fantastic. So I think the new Dread Warrior tops the Chaos Warrior sculpt. No problem. Then we have the Dread Warlock, who, again, this one's perhaps slightly taller, but this one is a little bulkier looking, but he's got armor on and other things where he's just in a robe carrying a staff. So, again, fairly comparable in nature, but definitely more realistic on the new one, more cartoony there. Finally, we've got our heroes. So there's the Barbarian, and you can see clearly the new sculpt has much more detail. I mean, look at the musculature on that. You can almost see runes carved into that sword. It's a very nice figure. They did a good job on it. They stand about the same height. This one's a little bit taller, but the swords go up to just about the same height. So kind of interesting they did that. The Wizard, very, very similar in pose. This one is a little more dynamic. Obviously, when they made these, they were trying to be as conservative as possible. So every single figure in the original game, with the exception of the gargoyle, was cast as a single piece. So no undercuts, no things like that. These, I have a feeling they got away with some additional pieces. But the Wizard, very, very comparable from one to the next. The Elf, leaving aside that it's a female for a change, we had a left-handed elf here, we have a right-handed elf here. So ignoring the gender swap difference there, the figures stand about the same height, but the proportions are different. Notice the head takes up less of the body here and more of the body here. So again, typical of cartoony, you've got exaggerated head proportions there. But those are very similar. And finally, we have the Dwarf, who looks a little sturdier. This Dwarf looks a little sturdier a fighter than this one, but again, I think the figures are fairly comparable, other than the general exaggerated nature of this one over here. So they've done a nice job on all the figures. Really like the new sculpts. Once again, I'm going to underscore, don't like the way they snap in. It's terrible. Last thing, we've got a piece of furniture. Here's the old bookshelf, and you can see this is a cardboard shell snapped into a plastic top, or this is a solid piece of plastic being cast that way. So I've got to give the edge to this new figure. That's just wonderful. The way they've got the books laid out on the shelf, or here it's like a whole stack of books the same. There's different sizes. They're laying sideways. You can see a rat in the background there. I mean, it's just wonderful. So these new sculpts, head and shoulders above the cardboard, are playing with the original. And the doors, that difference is even more pronounced. The cardboard door just looks sad compared to the new sculpted door. So there you have a side-by-side comparison of the components of the new game, from the cards to the miniatures to the terrain that comes with it. I'm very pleased overall with the quality of the new game. Just the sculpts are fantastic, head and shoulders by and large above the old sculpt. But again, it depends. Do you want the cartoony feel to it, like the original game, or do you want a more serious feel to it? The new one's definitely going to give you that more serious feel, but these terrain pieces are absolutely fantastic. So thanks for joining us on Building Geek Cred as we reviewed the new HeroQuest game and unboxed it. We will see you next time.